We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Will Rogers once quipped that politics has become so expensive that it takes a lot of money even to be defeated. And it seems the amount of cash now involved in presidential and congressional races is on an upwards trajectory, with no end in sight. But can the Republic survive its own excess of disposable wealth? Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's show, we'll tackle the big money questions that so afflict modern politics. It's going to be quite the show. I'd just like to take a brief moment to say a special thank you to our listeners out there in Hastings, Michigan on WBCH 1220 AM and 93.1 FM. Thank you for being here, and thank you to all the other listeners coast to coast here on the Radio America Network. Now, remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. Let's get started. Election season is on the horizon, and like a new dawn rising once again, the Never-Trumpers are back in force and racing to spend as much as they can to defeat Donald J. Trump. Now, is the democratic process being sacrificed in the name of personal animosity? We're joined once again by Liberty Nation's senior political analyst and longtime host of this here radio show, Mr. Tim Donner. Welcome back, Tim.
Okay, good to be here, Mark.
So, Tim, in 2020, we saw outfits like the Lincoln Project go to really any lengths to derail Donald Trump, and then further lengths to try and derail Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin with staging a tiki torch false rally. But it seems that this election cycle, that group and others are more determined than ever to keep Donald Trump from heading back to the White House. What's happening?
Well, I can tell you, having followed national politics and studied it for decades, I have never seen a movement that is so singularly aimed at a single person. In other words, the whole purpose of the Lincoln Project, they don't have any policy ideas. They don't have any vision for the future of America.
The project is kneecap Trump. That's the project.
Is. And they pretty much just admit that they are a group of disgruntled conservative, I would say activists, but more like strategists, people who were used to the comfortable conservative landscape in Washington, where they would come up with all kinds of, policy studies, and here's what should happen, and then they would always lose. And I think they were pretty much just absolutely irritated to the point of distraction with the fact that Donald Trump was championing so many of the things that they had pushed for years, but now suddenly it wasn't acceptable because it was this lowlife Trump who was promoting this. And then when he got elected, they went absolutely berserk because they had lost their standing in the conservative establishment in Washington, the think tanks and the big events and the places that people were used to comfortably going and speaking the conservative position. But like so many on the left, they were just deranged by Trump. I mean, to the point where they literally were driven to the point of insanity, as you can see by some of the things they've said over the years that are just outright ad hominem attacks on the man personally. And he's a liar, he's a fascist, he's a dictator, the country will never be the same. And they don't care. Lincoln Project people who are, Republican, old-time Republicans, most of them neoconservatives, Bush Republicans, shall we say, and Bush, of course, now seems very moderate. They care not one whit that what they've done is undergird the attacks of the left on Trump. In other words, they don't care a thing about where the left will take the country if it means getting Trump out of the way. So they'd rather run up, huge trillions and trillions more in federal spending and all the things that are associated with the Biden presidency. Doesn't matter to them as long as Donald Trump is not president. And they've they've run up a pretty big budget. Their fundraising has been quite successful because they're so targeted. But the group overall is, I'll just say, less than impressive in their honesty, in the way they raise money, in what they claim for themselves, in the purity of their motives. They've been long discredited, but of course, they're useful idiots for the left. That's what the Lincoln Project is. And I think they're particularly emboldened, Mark, because they succeeded in 2020. They succeeded in taking Trump down, and they're convinced, along with the Democrats, that they can do it again, which is why they want Trump to be the candidate, because they believe he's probably the only Republican they can beat. That's their belief.
Yeah, there's an element of elitism, well, more than an element of elitism and snobbery about the group. As you say, they've spent decades putting forward policy proposals, and then Trump comes along, and essentially he takes those proposals and he mushes them into something that's easily digestible,
Yes.
that can be essentially phrased into a single sentence to be
And can be
understandable.
made populist.
Yeah.
In other words, take conservative policy positions and present them in a populist perspective.
But isn't this precisely what the American people voted against in 2016? That snobbery, that elitism, that inside the DC Beltway kind of mentality where we're your betters. This is what we decide, and this is what will be rushed out across the country. And it's a very let's say it's a very undemocratic form of pitching ideas to the populace, isn't it?
Well, there's never been a more polarizing figure than Donald Trump, because the people that support him to the end would literally fall on their sword or watch him fire a bullet down Fifth Avenue and not even react.
Yeah.
The people on the other side will do anything, and they've proven they will do anything to take him down. They're driven by a hatred that, if you lived through the Nixon years, the Reagan years, and the Bush years, seems like it'd be hard to exceed the vitriol that they directed at those three Republicans. But they have far exceeded it with Trump, because they see him, and it's like Dracula sees the morning, and he has to turn away, and he cannot even live with Donald Trump. So again, having seen this for decades, national policy, I've never seen anything like the single-minded effort against Trump. And of course, what they've done is they've dragged the Trump voters, anybody who voted for Trump, down to the level of Trump, in their mind, saying they're semi-fascist. Anybody who would support this guy is just as bad as the guy himself.
Yeah, those domestic extremists going to school board meetings. Now, Tim, there's all this money going against Donald Trump, but of course you need a lot of money to run for president anyway. Now, I'm just curious, a final question for you. Like, what does it cost to run for election in the 21st century? And is this a barrier to entry? And I guess most importantly, sorry, a quick answer for a long question, if I may. Is this what the founding fathers envisioned?
No, but it's what they feared, that politics would become a place where people could vote themselves money, where people could use class warfare to take down those people who were successful. Thomas Jefferson himself said he didn't think that this experiment could really last more than a generation. That's how pessimistic he was. It is not what they
expecting a man to wear a boy's shirt, wasn't it, Thomas Jefferson?
More or less. That's true.
Okay, Tim Donner, we will be following the election as it comes to fruition, and we'll see what happens with the big money spent. Tim, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Always a pleasure, Mark.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Don't get caught up in the media madness. Join our movement for free thinking and free speech at libertynation.com. publishing news and analysis 24/7 with original articles by our team of authors who tell it like it is. Join us each week for online TV shows, The Uprising Podcast, and Liberty Nation Radio. We believe in free thinking and free speech. We are LibertyNation.com.